Good evening and a very warm welcome to Walter Kluwer presents How We Can Increase Patient Safety by Implementing Evidence-Based Treatment and Reduce Medication Errors in association with Healthcare Radius magazine. In the past, doctors didn't always have access to the medical research. They often decided how to treat patients using their own judgment and experience what they have learned at the medical school. Currently, it is impossible to think the modern healthcare that ignores evidence-based medicine, a concept which relies on three pillars: individual clinic expertise, the values and the desires of the patient, and the best available research. The complex combination of processes, technologies, and human interaction that constitute the modern healthcare delivery system can bring significant benefits. However, it also involves an inevitable risk of patient harm that can, and that too often, does result in actual harm. This webinar is all about recognizing the scale of avoidable harm linked with unsafe medication practices and medical errors. Healthcare Radius magazine, along with Walter Kluwer, has got together the subject matter experts who will today discuss about how we can increase patient safety by implementing evidence-based treatment and reduce medication errors. Allow me to quickly introduce our esteemed panel. We have Dr. Alok Roy. He is the Chairman and Managing Director, Medicare Synergy, and Chairperson of Medical Care Services. Dr. Alok Roy's knowledge and expertise in healthcare project management and business appreciation, coupled with his brilliant communication skills and dynamic leadership, have always put the organizations that he is associated with on the national and the global healthcare scene. Over the past 20 years, he has evolved into a reputed hospital management specialist with unsurpassed technical expertise and a visionary outlook by virtue of having established numerous healthcare facilities across country, including the four major heart hospitals and numerous other multi-speciality healthcare setups in India and abroad. Next, we have Dr. Vishnu Panigrahi in the group. He is the group head, Medical Strategy and Operations Group, Fortis Healthcare. Dr. Panigrahi contributed significantly to the strategic growth of Fortis Healthcare through the channel of medical strategy, quality, training, and education. His visionary outlook in establishing Fortis's clinical leadership in the area of clinical outcomes, patient safety, infection control, and research is well respected across the industry. He put Fortis on the international forefront of clinical outcomes by becoming a member of ICHOM Steering Committee for Coronary Artery Disease. Dr. Sajan Nair, he is the Chief Operating Officer, Zydus Hospitals. A postgraduate in medicine and hospital management, Dr. Nair is a rare amalgamation of healthcare quality, healthcare marketing, as well as finance. This makes him a healthcare management craftsman with many arrows in his quiver. Dr. Sajan Nair comes with 24 years of experience in hospital administration and management. He has been an NABH assessor since 2008. His career path started as a project manager at UNFPA, followed by working experience at various places like Fortis Malhar Hospitals, Chennai, as medical director and as a facility director slash CAO at Narayana Hridayalaya, Ahmedabad. Dr. Hari Prasad, he is the President Group Apollo Hospital Group. Dr. Hari Prasad serves as the President of Hospitals Division at Apollo Hospital Enterprises Limited and has served as its Chief Executive Officer of Central Division. Dr. Hari Prasad has been employed with Apollo Hospitals since the year 1999. Prior to holding the designation as aforesaid in the company, he served as a Vice President Medical of Apollo Hospital Enterprises since 2003. Dr. Harish Ramachandran, Country Manager, Clinical Effectiveness, Walter Kluwer, India. Harish Ramachandran is currently working as the Country Head, India and SAARC for the Clinical Effectiveness Division at Walter Kluwer. Prior to this, he was heading Connected Care at Philips, Africa, in the capacity of business, marketing, and sales lead. He was extensively working in the medical equipment space and has held various senior leadership roles at Philips India and also has experience of working with GE Healthcare in the past. Harish holds a postgraduate diploma in business administration program from Symbiosis and pursued his graduation in microbiology from Bangalore University. Mr. Pramanik, Shruankar Pramanik, is the CIO of Columbia Asia. Mr. Pramanik has over 21 years of experience and has worked on various digital transformation projects in healthcare during his career path. This includes the areas of AI and ML, process automation by using BOTs, and process transformation in critical areas like ICU, among others. He also has an experience in EMR and clinical data analysis. Dr. Vishal Rao is a regional director, head and neck surgery, surgical oncology and robotic surgery, and the dean for the Center of Academic Research at Healthcare Global SCG Cancer Center, Bangalore. He's a TEDx speaker and the inventor of the OM voice prosthesis, $1 speaking device for throat cancer patient, an innovation that has been considered among the 100 global social innovations across the globe and received wide recognition. He has more than 18 patents filed for his innovations and medical devices, drugs, techniques, and theories. Dr. Giridhar Gyani, he is the Director General at Association of Healthcare Providers India. Dr. Giridhar Gyani is currently the Director General Association of Healthcare Providers India, a conglomeration of entire healthcare providers, that is hospitals, nursing homes, clinics, diagnostic centers, and supporting organizations like pharmaceuticals, medical equipment companies, insurance, and providers. He is widely recognized as the founder of Healthcare Quality of India. During his tenure as Secretary General, Quality Council of India, Dr. Gyani played pivotal role in the formulation of operation of NABH for the first time in the country. Welcome all the panel members and thank you for giving your time today. Before I hand over the platform to Dr. Gyani, I would request everyone to keep their speakers on mute so that we can have a wonderful discourse and discussion here. Dr. Gyani, over to you.
Thank you, Sujata. So the topic of the day is, of course, we have already discussed this point, that evidence-based treatment. You see, in healthcare, there are two components. One is what we call is the service quality, and another is what we call clinical quality. The service quality components are well known, like you go to a hotel, you go to any service institute, you are expecting transparency, communication, empathy, above all in the healthcare. So these are the components which they come into the service quality, or what we call patient centricity. Other one is the clinical quality, which consumers are not aware, they can't really understand. But in heart and heart, as healthcare providers, that is an important component, and that is where we talk of accreditation, we talk of patient safety, we talk of the compensation to the hospital based on the clinical outcomes, all those things we talk. I remember in 2011, I was the member of the Academic Council in Medical Council of India when Dr. Talwar was the president. I was invited in a group of discussion by the medical students. That was a very interesting discussion, same topic, evidence-based treatment. The one group was talking in favor of it, one group was talking against it. So the group which was talking against it, they had this simple point. They say because with the time, the medical education is creating doctors who lack in the skill part. So they want to rely more and more on the technology. That's what we call evidence-based treatment. The other group said, no, evidence-based treatment is required because it provides accuracy. And that is the precise reason that the longevity of the population has gone up from 57 years today to 73 years. Of course, today I'm talking. But the other group again was countering that this is the only reason that cost of healthcare has gone up, because we are relying more on technology and technology brings cost. So anyway, it was an interesting discussion, but we cannot lose the sight of evidence-based treatment, because this provides us the important input to the serving clinician. Clinician has a skill, clinician has experience, he is good in diagnosis, but the end of it, the evidence-based treatment is the one which is already has taken root in it, and we are going to live with it. Other component I again remember from that discussion was that the medical legal cases are increasing and increasing, and that is where again they say okay, doctors is afraid now, and that's why he will like to go for this more of diagnostic. But I think somewhere when I concluded, I told them that this diagnosis and evidence-based treatment are two different things. please don't link up that evidence-based treatment only depends on the diagnosis. There are protocols, there are standard treatment guidelines, and at times my senior colleagues in the clinical part, they at times do not really look into the standard treatment guideline, how they keep on revising. Many of the doctors, because of they are so busy in their clinical practices, we do not keep track of the journals, what actually is happening. And that's what we saw in COVID also, that the protocols kept changing, but we were not able to disseminate across the country. Even within the Delhi, we were able to see that we were not able to communicate to the various hospitals working in Delhi itself, forget about the remote part. So the standard treatment guideline, the evidence-based treatment is the important component in improving the patient safety. And that is where the linkages come to the medication or medical errors. Instead of medication errors, I would like my colleagues to focus on medical errors, because medication error is part of the overall medical errors. Now that is where we created the standard accreditation standard in our country. And here also I'll quote one small discussion when 2006 we launched the standard. I was invited by various state government. I will mention only three: Gujarat, Kerala, and Tamil Nadu. And in one of the place, there was an interesting discussion. The senior doctors in the public health, they asked me, why are you expecting quality from us? We are providing free services. So I think the question was, they were expecting because the services is free, it need not have quality. And then anyway, I used to then confront with them in that sense, that I'm talking of patient safety, because I thought, let me not use the word quality. Let me bring in the word patient safety, because in my opinion, I think Vishnu and other people who have worked with me on this standard, we keep saying that patient safety and healthcare qualities are the two sides of the same coin. So then I was able to impress upon the people, and it took us some time, but these three states finally adopted the healthcare standard, accreditation standard, starting from Gujarat, followed up by Kerala, and then by Tamil Nadu. So this discussion has been going on. And as in now the insurance company now are venturing into it. Of late, two major insurance companies have started dialogue with us as AHPI, and they are saying that we will like, to monitor the clinical outcomes and relate the compensation as per the clinical outcome. Now, this practice is there in some parts of the USA. I don't know how much we will be able to bring it in our country, but it is going to be a good beginning that we make hospitals aware about it so that they focus on clinical outcome. At the end of this point, I will just say one small thing, that India today is 145 out of 190 in terms of rating on healthcare effectiveness. Now, this poor rating is for the simple reason that we are not able to provide healthcare available and accessible. When I'm seeing the people sitting here, all doctors sitting here, the hospital which they represent, their hospitals are at par with the best in the world, let me say that. But when we talk of the whole country, the tertiary care availability is only 85% is with the private sector. Only 15% government provide the tertiary care. And then the 85% of the tertiary care by the private sector is focused only, localized only in tier 1 and sometimes in tier 2. So that is the problem. So the issue here is now is that when we want to talk about evidence-based treatment, I'm not saying that we are focusing only on these two or 3,000 top of the line hospitals. We are talking of reaching out to the 65,000 hospitals and nursing homes in India to work on this one, and for which we have to create the framework. Unfortunately, accreditation, or what we call now the entry-level certification, people consider that is the end of it. That is the end of our journey. No, sorry, actually this is the important platform, important framework, which actually provides you the framework for governance or for the patient safety. From here, you have to make the journey towards patient safety, or what we call evidence-based treatment. So I think all in all, this is my opening remarks, and the expert panel will be talking to us, and I will be, intervening with each one of them. And welcome, Dr. Sajjan. You have joined just now, and thank you very much. So, so I think to begin with, let me start with my senior colleague, Alok Rai. I think who is the clinician, administrator, strategic, you name it. I think he has achieved that distinction. So, Dr. Alok Rai.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for inviting me to this panel, and extremely grateful to Healthcare Radius and Walters Kluwer to give me this opportunity to share some of my thoughts. And I'm feeling very delighted to be a very, very esteemed panelist. And it's a pleasure to be here. We always feel that those who come to our doorstep and seek healthcare, they're trusting us with their lives. And we all know that 10% of morbidity and death in the hospital is due to our errors. And probably the reason for that, as Dr. Gyani had just said, that 85% of tertiary care is delivered in private hospitals or more complicated processes. If we were to ride a cycle, we just check brake and paddle and life is over. And maximum we look at whether the bell is working or not. But the moment you move on to more and more complicated systems, the cross-check, the controls have to be very, very frequent and very precise. In our setup in healthcare, we know that across the group, across the departments, the training, the skill varies so often and so much it varies that it becomes impossible to ensure similar level of care at every point in the organization. In our organization, I'm sure all of you must have experienced. You all would have killed patient or made him sick at a different point of times, in the night time, in the morning time, when the shift is changing, when things are happening. And amongst all of them, the commonest is probably the medication error, where we write the same drug, we write the wrong doses, we write the wrong strength, and nurses reads it wrongly. Something else goes somewhere else. We repeat the drug, somebody else's drug, we give somebody else, and that creates havoc in the system. We all know that how often we come across it, we may accept it, we may not accept it. We choose to not accept it, but that's the truth. Thanks to accreditation in this country, which has brought those controls, and it has opened our eyes rather forcefully that unless you implement this, you're not delivering the best care. As we all have understood that quality and safety, they go hand in hand. You have quality for safety primarily. There's no quality which leads to safety. There's no safety which is led by quality. So I think even if we talk about this subject, patient safety, implementing it based on evidence, again and again, 10 times a day, talk to your people, train them as many times as possible, still you will never achieve a zero result. There will always be some percentages into it. So I think the smartest lies in that those who trust you, you give them foolproof system, which is not possible. There will be mistakes, but we can minimize it. And this is the way. There's no other way. You have to constantly monitor, put the evidence, give it to up, train them regularly. So I'm glad that Healthcare Radius and Walters Kluwer, and we've got a great panelist. I'm sure by your experience, we'll learn a little bit more and it'll be more beneficial. Thank you very much for inviting me again. Thank you.
Small question, because in FICCI, you have been leading, the cost aspect of the healthcare. So, I keep sometimes saying that quality may cost, but the poor quality in healthcare may cost the lives. So how do you justify, to the group of the students I was referring, that the evidence-based treatment is going to cost more? How do you answer to them that, yes, it may cost more, but or do you agree that it may cost more, evidence-based treatment?
Sir, if you look at the final score, it costs much, much less.
Wow.
Because what you pay at that point of time, so this is a journey of a brand. Yeah. When you start a brand, it always gets compared with the cost, but the end of it, it lasts forever and gives the repeat re-exploration of a patient, the correcting infection because of the poor practices. Giving a wrong medication and patient going into trouble is far, far more expensive. It is just the initial perception of ignorant that quality costs more. Quality at the end of it, it pays far more than value in terms of value, in terms of money spent, in terms of comfort and your reputation in the market.
Very good. Actually, what you answered is what we talk about holistic healthcare, or in the product, we call it life cycle cost, in a product, market, So I think this is a wonderful way of telling those group of students who thought that quality is increasing in the face of it. But no, overall, it is, not only decreases the cost, but, they provide the much relief to the patient instead of coming again and again to the hospital for subsequent, So good. I think very nice, Dr. Alok Rai. Now I will move to my another colleague, Dr. Hari Prasad. As I said, he's the doyen of our healthcare industry. So, Dr. Hari Prasad, please come in.
Thank you, Dr. Gyani. I'm not that old to become a doyen of the healthcare industry, nor have I contributed so much to the healthcare industry as yet. Hopefully, a little bit. Thank you so much. And thank you so much to Healthcare Radius for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to learn a lot from a very distinguished panel of experts. And I would like to start by reiterating what Dr. Alok said. Patient safety is about minimizing errors and not about eliminating errors. If someone comes up and says that they have no errors in their institution, it means either they do not have patients or they are lying. The first and most important aspect of patient safety is to accept that there are and there will be errors. What we should not do is to brush these errors under the carpet. Every error is an opportunity for improvement, and every error swept under the carpet is a missed opportunity. One of the main reasons for this mindset is to use the word error and negligence interchangeably. They are two different issues, and one must bear in mind that a majority of medical errors do not amount to medical negligence. We are shy or scared to talk about errors, and it's a cultural thing. The fear of being punished or being accused of a wrongdoing keeps errors under the radar. Errors often occur at the lower level, the nurses, the technicians, the junior doctors, and very often they remain buried at that level. It is the responsibility of the leadership to create a culture of no blame and encourage people at all levels to speak up and take every error as an opportunity for improvement. Only when we identify errors and report them can we create evidence-based patient care safety protocols and improve the quality of care and minimize errors. There's a lot of talk about accreditation, improving the quality and minimizing patient errors. Absolutely no doubt about it, whether it's the international accreditation systems or our own NABH, which I'm currently a member of the board. But I have a problem in which I've been voicing very clearly. Quality and patient safety is from survey to survey, which is not right or not appropriate. We should create a system where every day is a survey and patient quality is a job which is done on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, on an every minute. Because a couple of seconds of negligence or inadequate attention can actually mean the difference between life and death. I'll just give you an example. There was an elderly lady in one of the hospitals, about 85 years old, and she was bedridden. And what happened was she was given, the nurse who was there gave a bowel wash, and it spilled all over her dress. And in a hurry to clean herself, she didn't put the side rails and she went to clean herself into the toilet. By the time she came back, she found the patient had fallen from the bed and was unconscious. And she had an head injury and remained in the hospital for a very long time. And I just want to know whether this is an error or this is negligence, under what category it comes. If the nurse had just put the patient back on the bed and kept quiet about it, nobody would have known anything about it, and we would not have really gone into the depth of it or understood measures to be taken to actually prevent such errors in happening in the future. The next thing is people are talking about technology being a boon to prevent patient error, safety errors and minimize them or eliminate them. But I have a problem with that also. Technology is actually adding to the errors, the scope of the errors. I'll give you an example for that. There was this hospital where prescriptions were handwritten by the doctors, and there was a medication error, and patient suffered because of the medication error, because of a wrong prescription. Not a wrong prescription, an ineligible eligible prescription, which was a wrong drug was given by the pharmacy, and the patient suffered because of it. So what the hospital did as an improvement measure was they bought a whole software and made it into an e-prescription. Now, in this e-prescription, the same doctor again gave a prescription to a patient, and about 3 days later, the patient was brought back unconscious, and then was declared dead, and patient was taken away. Now, this doctor knew there was something wrong, and he actually went back onto the system and checked the prescription he had given. He had actually given an anti-diabetic drug to a non-diabetic patient, and the patient kept taking the drug and in the process became hypoglycemic and died. Now, what happened was, on the electronic system, there was a drop-down menu where you could choose the drugs. So instead of choosing the drug on the top, he by mistake chose the next drug, and that went into the prescription. So technology is adding newer problems to the whole thing. And I genuinely believe that it is a continuous process. Whether we bring in technology, the more expertise that we get in, the more technology that we get in, I think the emphasis on quality and patient safety needs to increase even more. There are real experts on this panel, and I'm here to learn. And I strongly believe that quality improvement is a continuous process and learning is never ending. And I look forward to learn from the rest of the panelists.
Thank you, Dr. Hariprasad. One simple question which Alok also mentioned, that variability between the college to college, the way we train our doctors, nurses. Apollo has been a pioneer in the medical education, administrative education. Can you really give us some little tips on how do we really harmonize the medical education across and add this component of skill, which we keep talking is the lacking?
I think that's a great question. And today we all seem to be in a hurry to increase the number of medical colleges. And yesterday I was on a CII conference with the Northeast, and the Assam health minister was proudly telling us that they had only 3 colleges, and very soon there will be 24 colleges in the state. That's a huge increase. The country definitely needs doctors. The country definitely wants them, and it's a good thing that the medical colleges are coming up. But I think there must be adequate attention paid towards the quality of the output of these medical colleges also. Unless there's a quality of an audit or an accreditation system which ensures that there's an audit on the output of these colleges, that the students who are passing out of these colleges are of a certain standard, I think we will continue to produce people who are less and less exposed to the various skills that are required to deliver good patient care. So I genuinely believe that apart from the medical council has a huge set of rules and regulations in terms of what should be the measurement of a professor's room, what should be the measurement of a demonstration room. All this, it's got plenty of rules, but I don't see enough in it to make sure that the skill sets which are developed by the students are of a certain standard, or at least of a minimum standard. Unless that comes into the curriculum and that comes into the process of enrollment of medical colleges, I don't see that happening. And I think it's a very, very important point that you raised.
Yeah, this one question has come, I thought of asking in the end, but let me, because you are the great teacher also, he's asking the difference between negligence and error.
See, those in the medical profession will always be blamed that when something goes wrong, it's because of negligence. That's become the sort of thinking across the country. But one must understand that negligence is when something is done intentionally. There is a difference between being intentional and an error happening. See, let's say there is an appendix and a doctor does not diagnose it to be an appendix because of the presentation or whatever it is. That is not negligence. The negligence is if you have done a surgery and if you left a instrument or a mop in this thing, that comes under negligence. So you need to clearly differentiate between the two. And unless you differentiate between the two and understand that there's no doctor on the surface of the earth who would try and harm a patient at any time of his or her career. That is very, very clear. But yes, there are going to be times in situations where they tend to overlook certain things and become negligent. That is negligence. Mm-hmm. But what happens in the routine course of things, if you start counting that as negligence, then I'm afraid it is very, very difficult to practice medicine. We will go the American way. What we do here in 100 rupees, we will be doing it in $100, which is not what we want to do.
Yeah, that's right. That's good. Thank you very much. And I now move to my other friend, Dr. Bishnu, because whenever, when he was in Odisha also for some time, whenever we used to have some doubt on clinical matters, first name used to come to my mind was Bishnu. I used to bother him to answer. So I think this is a very right topic for you to give your opinion, Dr. Bishnu.
Sir, thank you, sir, for your kind words, and it's a great honor for me to be here. And I'd like to thank Healthcare Radius and Walter Covers for inviting us to this panel. And there's a esteemed panel here. But what I'd like to share from the patient safety and medication part is that I'm not a medical administrator as such. I've been a clinician pushed into medical administration. So I'll give my things because there's a larger audience who is hearing it. So why this is happening? If you look at the five most important issues that come up every hospital faces across the globe. First is the wrong diagnosis. Second is medication errors. Third comes hospital-associated infection, then the patient fall, and the fifth one is a smaller one, is that we send patients too early from the hospital. So since we are talking about medication error and patient safety, I think this is a very relevant point, and it's a thing that's happening across the globe, and I think so India is no exception. But we should know why these are happening, because to do anything, tackle anything, the why must be known. So then you can act on it. So I think so because there's a larger audience looking at it. So I'd like to just highlight a few things quickly. One of the most important things is the factors which are associated with the healthcare professionals, all of us. It could be lack of adequate training, therapeutic training. Like Dr. Hariprasad mentioned, we keep on opening medical college and the training imparted is not appropriate. So that is a quality issue there. Inadequate drug knowledge and experience. On this is a very important thing because, see, I like to just share an example. A patient who's having low potassium, there are some potassium-sparing drugs you can give. Now, there are certain diseases you have to be aware of. So if you give the wrong dose, there are suppose spironolactone has a different way of acting. It acts through the aldosterone antagonist. You have trimethoprim, which acts through the sodium channels. So you should know the pathophysiology and the pharmacology of the drugs before you impart it. So knowledge is also a very important part of it. So I think so inadequate knowledge is also there. Then you should always have a proper knowledge of the patient. And this is where history taking is a very important thing. Alok and myself, we come from the same college, and this is what our teachers had always told to us. Please take a proper history of the patient. That is the most important and fundamental thing in medicine, which Dr. Hariprasad just now mentioned, that we are going into too much of technology and forgetting the basics. Proper history will give us a lot of information about the patient, what all medication the patient was taking. So these are important things that we sort of ignore. Then sometimes even looking at the patients also, the factors which are associated with patients, their level of education, their personality, the literacy. So be patient with them. Try to talk with them properly so they understand it. And be sure that whatever you have told them, they have sort of been receptive to it. So these are the things that are associated with patients. Then working environment, like the workload sometimes has its pitfalls. There's distraction because of various things that happen. Standardized protocols and procedures need to be there to sort of look at things. Insufficient resources. And I'll give a very small example of physical environment, the work environment. Like simple thing, if you don't have a proper lighting, the ventilation is not good. Sometimes you may miss out on looking at the right drug while writing the right dose. Something. So these are small things. It appears small, but as I say, take care of the small things. The big things will take care of themselves. Then again, the factors associated with the medicine, writing the proper names, labeling it properly. So these are some of the things which do happen. Obviously, we are moving over to a computerized system. So I think the computerized order entries will be a boon going forward, because most of our doctors, we have a very nice handwriting. So, and although it isn't mandated that you must write in capital letters, but very often we don't do it. So that's another gap that is coming in. So these are the things which lead us to all these things. And the other thing is on the medication reconciliation. So whatever medications have been given, that reconciliation process should be there, followed in each hospital. And that's the process that needs to be followed. If this is not done, we will keep on having this medication errors for eternity. So I think the medication reconciliation is a very important thing. So right from the time of admission, while the patient is in the hospital, till discharge. So these are, the patient may be at the time of admission, maybe it's on certain medications. If so while asking them, they may say, but at the same time, we must ask them for the prescription that they had, even if they don't have it with them. And everyone has a mobile phone now. You can ask them to sort of take a photo and from the family and send it across. So you know that exact medications that the patient is on. A patient who's non-diabetic and you give a diabetic medication, that's a disaster that Dr. Hari Prasad was mentioning about. So then again, in the hospital, the medications that are being provided, again, see that this is properly reconciled, and at the time of discharge. So discharge is another slip that happens as far as medication errors are concerned. The patient will be, there'll be maybe, because now a lot of the patients who are coming into tertiary care hospitals, they don't come with single disease. There'll be multiple involvements there. So there'll be multiple consultants who would have seen them. So while the orthopedician may have just done a knee replacement, but there'll be others, maybe seen by endocrinologists, have been seen by others, by the cardiologist. So have all those medications been put in the discharge summary so that these are captured, so that when the patient is discharged, they follow the right medication, so there is no slip up there. The other important thing which I would like to stress here is very important, is that please encourage reporting. Please encourage reporting from bottom down upwards. And it should be a non-punitive environment. Unless we do this, we will, what we are seeing is tip of the iceberg. There's a huge amount that will keep on being there and will keep on hitting us. So these are some of the things that I wanted to just share, and so that we learn from each other and look at how do we go about it. And some of the things which I'd like to say, that what we have started doing in Fortis, because it's important that what we are doing, I'd like to share, is that we have started have a Fortis formulary where we have a minimum number of brands per molecule. That's a very important, good thing that I'm not saying we have done, is that presently we have 1+3, the innovator research brand and 2 branded generic. So we bring down the inventory levels. Then the restricted antibiotic order, there's an alert that comes in, because see, if this is, I'm digressing, sir, slightly, sir, but restricted antibiotic is something that we have to do, because we are, the drug resistance is increasing across antibiotic resistance. So we must be very conscious about what drugs we prescribe. Every hospital should have a list of restricted antibiotics, which there's no restriction on the consultant prescribing it, but there has to be a rational, and that justification should be there. Then there are Schedule X and Schedule H drugs which we need to look at, the high-risk medications, narcotics. So all these have to be double-checked before it is prescribed and administered, because the administration errors sometimes happen when 2 people do not check it with these high-risk medications. So these are things that I had to say, sir, and it's very nice to come across. And on the thing about the outcomes, quality, what you're mentioning, the value that we give, sir, is the outcomes divided by the cost. So the value has to be the most important part, and the value can only be driven by good outcomes. In other words, patient safety obviously is the most important thing. If you have good patient safety, that will result in good outcomes, and the quality, the care that the patient gets, the value that the patient gets will be immense.
So you have been the clinical director and now heading the strategy and operations, and you belong to a chain where, there are very top-notch consultants. So my question to you is that how do you make sure, there are SOPs available and at times errors happen because we do not look at the SOPs. We do it in our own way of doing it. But it is very difficult for when you are heading this department to really involve and motivate, the senior consultant to look at the SOPs, involve them in doing clinical audits. I'm told many senior consultants, they, give this task to juniors. Okay, you carry out the clinical audit. So that doesn't bring the effectiveness. So how do you do it? And how difficult sometimes it is for you, and how have you succeeded? If you can tell us that part to all of us.
So there are two things that you mentioned about the clinical audit. So what we do is, because if clinical audits are done for any cases that we feel that needs to be looked at, any one that has had not a good outcome. So someone from that that specialty is always there, not from that unit, but from that same specialty, and two other senior doctors are there with the medical head there. So it is looked at and in a sort of unbiased manner. And in general, sir, there is a good acceptance to this, and this is discussed in the monthly morbidity mortality meetings, which all the senior clinicians are there. It's an open, frank discussion. So definitely this helps us to sort of get into the thing and correct thing. And the other parts we have done is that now every specialty, we've created a specialty council. So for neurology, for oncology, for cardiology, cardiac surgery. So all the big senior clinicians of that specialty from across the network, they sit down. We have this, obviously now everything is virtual, and they give us guidelines on how to go about it.
Okay, that's what So this is a little difficult area, but I know the way you have explained. You have got 5-6 hospitals or 10 hospitals. It is easy for you to interact and do networking, learn from each other. So that is nice. And now let me come to Dr. Sajjan Nair, whom I know actually has been involved in the subject of quality patient safety right from beginning. I will say that, and he also keeps to eye on the industry issue, because what happens, most of us, of course, running our hospital, all are busy, but some of us have to come forward, like even Vishnu came forward and headed our chapter at Odisha and even in Delhi. So Sajjan also has been, quite active, proactive, I will say, to, understand the challenges of the healthcare industry. So let me go to him now and hear his views on this evidence-based treatment, medication error, and associated issue. I believe you want to make some presentation?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, please.
Before that, sir, good evening all. And thank you so much. Starts with Sujata and Walters Kluwer for bringing me together with two of my mentors, two of my great mentors, Dr. Gyani Saab and Dr. Vishnu Banigrai. I don't know how good was a mentee, but you were definitely the greatest mentors who have made my life. Thank you so much, sir. And I've made a small presentation because I thought that's the way we can look at it. And since all of you have already introduced the topic of medication errors and patient safety, I thought I would talk about the CDSS, which we wanted to talk about, if somebody can put in the slide. And very, very important, sir, Dr. Gyani, sir, thank you for being there in India. You have been the legend. And if you have not been there, we would not have been talking about this today. You are the one who started NABH. Thank you for being there from all of us.
Thank you.
Can we have the slide, please? I was asked to talk on what extent can CDSS help to standardize healthcare delivery. That is a part which we are going to talk after medication errors and patient safety, which has been so well talked about by my previous speakers. Can I have the first slide, please? So when this topic was given to by Sujata, I went around looking for the prescriptions which were there in the COVID. So I thought I would share this prescription here. The answer is here. This is a prescription of a COVID patient. Can I have the second slide, please? And if anybody can tell me that medication errors can't happen in this country, then he's eligible for. This is what you see as a sample. Perfect fit for medication error, perfect with all sorts of errors. And the best part is this patient still survived after all those things. Can I have the next slide, please? So what we did is I looked into the standards where we are as a country. And this is electronic medical adoption model. And where as a country we are, most of us are surviving somewhere around 2-3. Yes, 2-3 corporate hospitals have reached up to 6, but still 7 is very far off. If you look at the CDSS, it starts at stage 3, and that's where and it's so easy to reach, and that's why it becomes very important also in the whole process of controlling medication errors and patient safety. So the contextual and background on which I would like to speak is presently the government is very, very robust on National Digital Mission. We all know they have also adopted SDG targeted by 2030. On the CDSS, the funding has shown a very, very positive trend towards digital healthcare. If you look at the market is going to reach around 1.17 billion by 2026. And that's a huge amount which you see. The global funding presently is around $550 million. So these are very, very robust figures which we see. So that's a huge interest in CDSS, medication errors, patient safety. And for India, thanks again, the one who started is NABH, at least sensitize the doctors, the staff and everybody on the quality of medical care surveillance in India. So when I was asked where the influence of CDSS will come in. So I started looking at the public health, and which is a need of the hour in this country. Where we can work the best is in the community and outpatient focused area where the remote places need access to care. And if you ask me, more importantly, they need quality care. If you look at an example, we can work, already some things are happening in this country where ASHA workers or ANM, they are working on bettering the maternal and child health indicators by using handheld devices. At the same time, a huge amount of data has been captured, which is taken to the state and national level for future resource planning. Same of the things is already started happening on the breast cancer areas. Already we have an oncologist, oncosurgeon here. I think he will take it forward. And the very area where we need to work is non-communicable disease. India is already a capital where CDSS can make a huge difference if you look at diabetes. Next, please. Patient safety. We have been talking about it. All my speakers, all my teachers have been talking about it. Unparalleled advantage when it comes to CDSS. There's a prevention of medication errors. We have got a lot of ways of doing it, looking at medication. You've got a drug-drug interaction programs. You've got electronic drug dispensing systems. You've got a bar point of care. But so many systems sometimes create problems also because the doctors who are using that get a lot of alerts. Every single moment they get alerts, they can't sleep. So one of the things when we look at developing these programs is can we stop the alert fatigue? We need to have only critical alerts, non-critical alerts, which can be taken at a different level. Next, please. On the clinical management, like sir was saying, Vishnu sir, Hari Prasad sir was saying, adherence to proper clinical guidelines, and obviously it will lead to better outcomes. What is beautiful in this thing is we will have a two-way communication between the physician and the patient. And he can track whether the patient is adhering to the treatment guidelines or not. And then you have got a cross-check which is done. It's more of a personalized care. Going forward, where we can have a beautiful things in the hospital is all of us can come together and start working on an antibiotic stewardship program. Drug resistance is one of the biggest problems in this country, and we need to address it now. And this can be a game changer when we can integrate it across hospitals and corporate groups to make a common India's drug policy on antibiotics. Next, please. Now, somebody said cost effective. Why it is not being adopted? Yes, it is not being adopted because the softwares are very costly. The licensing is very costly, and there is no business plan associated with using this. We can't have a business proposal for using this CDSS. But if you look at it in long-term plans, it's very cost effective. Obviously, some of the immediate things that you will get is average length of stays can be monitored. And like somebody was saying on medications, we can have an alternative to molecules. If we have got two different companies, we can always give a better, cheaper molecule, but at the same efficacy to the patient. But all these things need long-term planning and appropriate data and research. Now, more important is this research and data will give us good policy making decision at the state and national level. Next, please. The final environment, which I thought is very important, is the support, is integration of end-to-end from pathology, radiology to the patient. So what we are trying from patient at the community level, from OPD to admission to discharge across hospitals. And now already climate and environment is a major issue with us. Once we move on to paperless, we will be saving a lot of money. So a lot of money on the wastage of environment on papers. The advantage on the diagnostic level is when end-to-end results are integrated, we will have cost saving on duplication of tests. And finally, we will have a standardization of reports. Next, please. But however, doing this is said, we have got these challenges which are very unique to India. Health is still a state subject. We talk about digital health, but we need to align it with the national level. Another problem, every 100 kilometers, the language changes, the diet changes. You have got a vernacular language because you go to the last mile, the A&Ms and ASHA to deliver the health products. The disease pattern changes from area to area. What is in Gujarat is not there in Bihar. What is in Jharkhand is not there in Kerala. There, obviously, presently, the system of software and systems are very high cost. So it's a little prohibitive. We need to look at it. There is one thing which we call about in evidence-based medicine, that is on a practice-based medicine or experiential learning of doctor. If you want to get a proper CDSS, you need to factor that in, because we see a lot of clinical cases, almost the doctors see huge number of cases as against US. Obviously, like Panigrahi said, we need to have the buy-in from clinicians, because that's how the India country works. Either you have Janda or Danda. So whichever ways, either you have the IMA or doctors coming together and working out, or you have to have an order diktat from somewhere else. There, one factor which is very interesting in India is a huge population of alternative medicine users. And that we need to factor in when we are going to look at drug-drug interactions, medication errors, and it is going to be difficult. Along with that, we have got a unique property of WhatsApp University, which gives more information than desired, which needs to be looked at. That makes CDSS on the difficult. And finally, one of the things we need to start early. We need to get into medical and nursing college curriculum as fast as possible, so that the next generation of doctors which come out comfortable, use this thing and make patient safety one of the important things in clinical part of care. So these were my points. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Very important point. Only one small question I want to ask you, that antibiotic stewardship. We have been talking for quite some time. How you have, let us say, succeeded in implementing stewardship in your hospital, and how do you provide tips to others to follow?
Sir, I will be very honest, we have not been very successful. Right? And the integration of the HUNET, we are still on the paper pen stage. HUNET, we were trying to integrate with the HIS system, but the integration of interfaces and all those things taking time. However, we do have a data. Our successful level is on the data part, on the Excel sheets and all the PPTs which we decide. But integration into the system has not been very successful. We are still working on that. We had a bad ransomware attack in 2020 where everything crashed down. So we are back to zero. So we are again working on it. But one thing is there, the clinicians are very sensitized to antibiotics. We have, especially the use of higher end antibiotics is very well restricted in our systems. Any Tom, Dick and Harry can't write any of the restricted antibiotics. And it is always looked in by the microbiologist. And we also look at the pharmacy sales. So that gives us a very good idea of what is happening.
That's okay. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
For a long time I'm listening to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
And now I move to Dr. Vishal Rao. Again, a clinician par excellence in this group. And we have now, of course, 3 speakers, and we have still 30 minutes. So about 7 minutes each will be, devoting by each one of you. So over to Dr. Vishal Rao.
First of all, again, a special thanks to Healthcare Radius, the editor Sujata, and to Harish from Walter Clovers for putting all these efforts and bringing all of us together. Thanks to Gyani sir for taking this lead. I'm going to be giving a little brief gist about evidence-based medicine and what it has for our day-to-day lives as clinicians. And I think I would like to start by saying that evidence-based medicine, risk communication, and medico-legal litigations, these 3 are going to be the hallmarks of the 21st century medicine. And these 3 are all interconnected. They are going to be the hallmarks of the 21st century medicine. Now, this has led to the discussion of some experts calling this in a philosophical term as what we call as medical epistemology. differentiating between justified belief versus an opinion. We are all walking this thin rope of evidence-based medicine, and it's very interesting. So I'll I wanted to allude to a very interesting paper sometime back when I was at Hopkins, visiting there as for the leadership programs. I came across a very interesting paper by Barbara Starfield from the Public Health School of Johns Hopkins. Very interesting paper which asked, is US one of the best healthcare systems in the world? Very interesting paper. And in that, she brings out this question on the leading causes of mortality in United States, where she talks about the most important cause was cardiovascular, number 1. Number 2 was cancer. And guess what was number 3? It was doctor. About nearly 225,000 deaths from iatrogenic causes. This is a very interesting paper published in the Journal of American Medical Association, JAMA 2000. You all can read it up, Barbara Starfield. 12,000 deaths from unnecessary surgeries per year, 7,000 deaths from medication errors, about 20,000 odd deaths from other errors, 8,000 deaths from nosocomial infections, and about 1 lakh deaths from non-error adverse effects of medications. She collated this entire thing and put it as 225,000 deaths per year. A very interesting perspective. She put forward an argument, but what I wanted to tell was, I think that's the beginning of evidence-based medicine. Today, every aspect, most of the medical practices across the world are driving towards evidence-based medicine because there needs to be a justified belief in the use of certain particular ways of treating a patient, and that has always been a difficult one. So, like Dr. Hari Prasad very beautifully elaborated, and Dr. Vishnu earlier, and Gilidhar sir, all of you all have very clearly elaborated about the importance of evidence-based medicine. I think there is no dichotomy in the view about saying that we need evidence-based medicine. Evidence-based medicine has a precedence over eminence-based medicine. However, we also need to have a differentiation between what is statistically significant and what is clinically significant. It is equally important to weigh both of these. That sometimes would define the philosophical limits of evidence-based medicine. That there is a clinical perception, a clinical decision, an individual judgment that is also involved beyond a p-value. And that is why clinicians cannot disentangle themselves from the aspect of clinical judgment combined with evidence-based medicine. I often use this as an oncologist. There we're practicing in stage 3 cancers of head and neck, of the throat cancers, where of the laryngeal region is treated with CTRT because 80% of them have an organ preservation. So there was a sudden rise in the use of chemoradiotherapy. About 3 decades later, the data that came out from the US on the NCDP database showed that the one single cancer where the survival was decreasing was because of the inadvertent use of chemoradiation in voice cancer surgeries, in throat cancers, leading to the aspect that indiscriminately, if you use evidence, you may actually go wrong. There still needs to be a clinical decision-making tool embedded within your evidence-based system. And these two cannot be disconnected. And I think I'll quote a very small example for this. Sometime back, the UK Committee on Safety of Medicines wanted to introduce the 3rd generation oral contraceptive pills. And they came out with this very interesting Dear Doctor letter to about 2 lakh odd doctors, pharmacists, etc., where they actually send out a very important message that 3rd generation contraceptive pills increases the risk of life-threatening blood clots in the legs or lungs by 2-fold. That is 100%. So they send out this communication, and it also went out in the media. After that, what happened was a complete chaos. Now, let me tell you that what was their conclusion based on? Their conclusion was based on a study where for every 7,000 women using 2nd generation pill, 1 had thrombosis, and if you use the 3rd generation, it will become 2. So what they, instead of talking about, instead of looking at the absolute risk, they talked about the relative risk. So they presented evidence, but risk communication went wrong. So evidence-based medicine and risk communication are integrated. So if evidence-based medicine has to be utilized in its best way, risk communication will have to equally go with it with clinical judgment. You cannot segregate the two. And I think this was a very classical example, because later on they regretted and said, I think the impact of usage of the impact of abortions on thrombosis was higher than the impact of third generation pills. And what eventually UK did was have more abortions which had a higher risk of thrombosis. So these are the kind of catastrophic things that can happen with improper risk communication of evidence base. I would like to conclude with one last very interesting study from the Harvard Medical School by Robert Ye. This again was published in the British Medical Journal in 2018. Very interesting study. The study was titled Parachute Use to Prevent Death and Major Trauma When Jumping from an Aircraft, a randomized controlled trial. Very interesting study. In this particular study, the results concluded, and please hear me, the results was that the parachutes used did not reduce death or major injury in either of the groups, control versus intervention, which is parachute. And this finding was consistent across all multiple subgroups. Think of it for a second. This was a randomized control trial on the use of parachutes and for safety and major trauma, but did not show any evidence-based results. But towards the end, very interestingly, the authors wrote a note. However, the trial was only able to enroll participants on a small stationary aircraft on the ground, suggesting cautious exploration on high altitudes. So evidence-based medicine is important, but there are limitations, and interpretations are crucial in evidence-based medicine as much as risk communication and clinical judgment. So I think we are talking about EBM not here to replace clinical judgment, but important is, I think, to individualize and also keep evidence-based medicine and use clinical judgment in individual cases. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vishal. There is a small question which you can answer or somebody else can answer, that we have Institute of Safe Medication Practices, ISMP. Can we do something similar to that in India?
I think, sir, this is a very important aspect, that while we talk about evidence-based medicine in India, it is crucial to understand that evidence-based medicine, like you rightly pointed out earlier, needs funding. Evidence-based medicine would need a systematic funding to be given, which in India is currently lacking from the research point of view.
Right.
So I think even in COVID, during this COVID period, we understood that there were countries that had Center for Pandemic Preparedness. So similarly, in these areas, we will need to look at funding and creating an academia industry bridge by bringing in such kind of knowledge aggregate institutes, collating data, and having a larger strength of academia industry collaborations to share and contribute.
Thank you. Dr. Hariprasad, you want to say something?
Yeah, I think it is a must to have something which is Indian, because what happens in India is significantly different from what happens in the rest of the world. And for example, I'll just give you an example which may be relevant. For all of us, we grew up learning that the cardiac risk score, Framingham study was the only study available in the world for identifying a person who is at risk for a coronary event. And then we actually did a huge retrospective study and found that Framingham study doesn't impact the Indians as much as it should be. So we created a fresh machine learning algorithm with AI, where simply because the risk factors in an Indian are significantly different from a Caucasian. And the Framingham study was based on the Caucasian population. So similarly, the practices in Indian healthcare are significantly different from practices in other countries. And I think we have enough data, enough use of medications to create our own system. And I think we should use the existing organizations like NABH. NABH must make it mandatory for all the organizations to report medication errors. And that becomes the starting point for creating a library or a system which will help in creating solutions to prevent the errors.
Thank you. Thank you. Very relevant. I think, yeah, NABH can certainly take up this job because all accredited hospitals are on their panel actually, and it is built into the standard, but we are not able to really get that data. I agree with you. So now let me turn to our technology man, Mr. Pramanik. Because we have been talking about the technology by the clinicians. Now let us hear it from the technologist, what he thinks about the evidence-based treatment.
Thanks, Dr. Gani, and thanks, Sujata. Thanks, Harish. And I'm privileged that I'm a part of this meeting and discussions specifically. And it's obvious there is a technology mindset and clinical mindset always conflict in many areas. Like I was just listening my co-panelist, and there are a lot of things which I can defend, but it's not a point of defending those points. We have to give the solution basically. So before starting any where we can take care of these applications of technology to prevent this medication error, I just want to share some statistics you people already know that there is unsafe care is a bold subject. Under unsafe care, medication error is a kind of bullet point. And under unsafe care, there is another point is unsafe transfusion practices also. So in WHO, there are certain statistics which I was reading, in high-income countries, 1 of 10 harmed people are due to for this medication error in high-income country like USA, UK kind of area. And on that number, 50% can be preventable. So due to non-applications, improper applications of technology, it could not be prevented. And another statistics is 15% of total activity and expenditure is a direct result of adverse event. So in terms of, if we think about the cost of the patient care, so if we reduce the medication error, we can prevent 15% of administrative cost or other functional cost also in that area. So these 2 points is very important, which I would like to share with people. And now I can touch upon where we can use the technology, like broader sense CPOE modules, what Dr. Sarjan Nair also mentioning, electronic prescription orders. And under electronic prescription orders, there are certain points like drug-to-drug adverse interactions facility, like reference of historical practices, what is called evidence-based practices in diagnosis and clinical guidelines also. And third is clinical decision support system, CDS. And all these things can be matured if we get a proper kind of data and proper kind of algorithms. Otherwise, this system is faulty. Like Dr. Hariprasad was mentioning that he has changed some software, but still the doctor is doing the wrong practices. It's not because of the technology, it's because of your algorithm. Because if you don't find that patient is some diabetic patients, it's a fast parameters you have to identify the patients. Like someone was telling, like patient history should be captured properly. Otherwise, if it is not parameterized, then your diagnosis will be all failed. So that will intend to the medication error. So that is the problem of technology and clinical decision support systems. That is the gap as of now. So it is still maturing. There is a software they are working on, because the practices in the third world country and practices in the developed countries is totally different. And there are a lot of algorithm difference are already there. So this is the one area, but again, all these systems are alerting system. It is not going to help you, the patients, to do something. It will alert the clinicians. So clinicians need to be alerted by these systems. Now, if he's still doing the wrong things, then it is called negligence, right? The system is giving the alert, still you are doing the same things, So it is called negligence in that case. So the answer is the difference is negligence and error is lying on this part. Another part is like e-prescriptions, definitely I talked about, and barcode medication administrations. This is a very good successful things, barcode medication administrations and automated ICU charting. In my career, I have implemented twice these things, and in Gangaram also, it's a premium hospitals. Automated ICU charting helps you a lot. Means you can reduce your nursing, you can increase your nursing hours also. Nurse can more focus on their clinical part rather than administrative part. So you can help you on this part. So if something coming out wrongly, the parameters coming wrongly, nurse can be alerted on that point. Another thing is like sign out handover communication related. When like a process of passing patient specific information from caregiver to the another, means suppose a team of clinicians is passing patient's details to another team of caregiver, then the handover process should be very automated. Otherwise, it will create a kind of medication error. So if we automate that handover process, so this area can be taken care of. So breakdown in handover causes sentinel events also in many cases. So this is the point I would like to mention. Another is smart pumps. Nowadays, smart pumps are coming, intravenous infusion pumps that are equipped with the medication error protection software. It is coming already in built software. So we can implement those things where we can reduce at least certain percentage of medication error. Another thing is which in my career I implemented is RFID based tagging surgical items at OT level. This is also very important things where you can reduce the medication error. So these are the error where IT can, and another, sorry to I forget to mention, like integrated software. Like nowadays, there is very difficult to find a complete integrated software. Like someone is looking for good clinical systems, good EMR system, EHR systems, and another, your support systems, your billing and finance systems is totally different. Your LIS is different, your RI is different. So they are talking each other, and the integrations is happening. I can say that it will be an error-less integrations. There will be error, definitely error. So we need to find out some good integrated systems, and it should be a clinical-based system. Nowadays, HIS is not a billing system. HIS, it's 15 years back, we used to say that HIS is a billing system, but HIS is not a billing system. Now, hospital is looking for a clinical systems, not HIS. So the entrepreneur like Dr. Alok, he should think about that we should implement the EMR proper, EHR proper, rather than thinking about we should implement billing systems, right? So this is from technology person's expectations from the clinical heads, operation heads.
Okay, thank you. There are one or two questions, but what I will do, I will go over to Harish Ramachandran because he is also a technology man. So I'll combine the question for both of you after I listen to Harish. So please, Harish Ramachandran, please come in.
Thank you, sir. So good evening. Really esteemed the in front of this panel. I think it gives me, I think I'm very humbled to be speaking. And particularly after hearing to everybody talking of CDS technology, I don't know how much I will be able to add value. Probably I'll be summing up a lot of the points what you had mentioned. So for me, when I look at it, I think clearly three things comes out to me. What are the benefits of I'll put a technology and CDS together here, saying what are the benefits of technology like CDS? And in what I heard from all the points was in the clinical workflow. And if we have to do it, I think the challenge in front of it is how do we achieve it? I don't know if I can answer all of them, but in my limited understanding and being in healthcare for some years, the way I see it is that what is the role of CDS should be? I think the role of CDS to any caregiver, and in this case, when I say whether it is a clinician or a nurse or any pharmacist, we mentioned everybody who is involved, I think what is the role of them should be? Either it should reinforce the decision what they already have, or it should help in changing the decision what they are trying to foresee in front of them. If I keep these two in front of it, The CDS, the biggest benefit it should be, which will land up, would be to reduce clinical variability, which is the biggest topic today, even in any forum today, globally also. And when you look at that word clinical variability, I believe there are two aspects which comes very significant. One is the clinician's decision, which we spoke about, whether it should be reinforcing or helping him. But I think the other person who's involved into that is the patient. So the patient's preference also needs to be mapped. And if you keep these two pillars together, that's where this needs that the entire care team is well aligned on the how the patient is being cared for and is managed completely. That is the benefit which I believe CDS brings in from overall, from a standpoint, whether it is a clinician, a hospital, or a patient. End of the day, it should be at the patient at the center. Now, when I look at it from a technology standpoint, technology today makes the CDS is available at a point of care, because I know technology, when we speak, the CDS, it can start from the library, from various places. But I think it's more than anything, which I heard from many of the speakers here. It should be available at the bedside or on any given point of time. So it can be available on a computer, which is on the network of the hospital, or it can be on a mobile app, because today integrations have come in so much. There is technology which is available, which you can see it on the app, or like what my earlier colleague was talking, it can be there on the EMR, which is integrated. Now, there are advantages, and I'm not saying which is better, which is not, but it should be available across all the mediums, so that when a care provider needs it, it's available for him. Now, moving further, when we spoke about that clinical workflow, because technology, benefits of technology in workflow, I think one of the biggest things which I believe is pathways. When we call pathways, and just to make that a little longer, I think today there are standard, which are latest evidence-based pathways are available for common conditions, because as they say, if you are able to manage the common condition, they have the 80% care variability. So those pathways are already available, and they in fact provide personalized recommendation or management for each individual patient, which clearly says that a hospital which is trying to adopt it can do it. Now the technology makes it now to be more simple and probably easy to use. So without a technology, it could be done, but technology makes it simple and easy to use. So if I keep these two elements together and then bring it to the workflow, my earlier colleague talked about integration, and I mean EMR and various others. I think the integration with an EMR drives adoption of a CDS in routine practice, because I heard people talking about it, physicians talking about how the routine practice, it needs to get embedded into it. Now, when I say integration, again, it's pretty complex. I mean, I heard about cost and various elements. And integration can be very simple. You need not look at the highest end on the other end of the spectrum of like a Smart on Fire or anything else. But it can be simple by putting an embedded link for searches. Embedded links where it's easier for them to access for a clinician or for the care provider, I would say. Or it can be linked to individual topics, which can be coming from a clinical committee of the hospital, so that I also heard Dr. Prasad talking about which elements which you want to pick up. You might not want to pick up a topic which is very clear, which is very relevant, which the clinical committee of the hospital or the broader spectrum clinical committee can identify, and those links can be provided. The next level of integration could be where you can have targeted content, which can be like a content specific one which is more specific, which is probably related to a patient in a particular patient's environment or in a clinical term. Or you can go on further. I mean, if this is, in my opinion, this integration is a journey. It needs to start simple. Over a period of time, you can go on to that level where it is targeted content, or even going where today, even at the US, where we're talking of Smart on Fire and others are there, are just being implemented, which means in Smart on Fire, if any new technology, the latest evidence is updated, you would not need to go and do that again, because the updation happens at the back end, which basically relieves a lot of stress and strain of going and finding the right relevant new things coming. So overall, for me, when I put this whole thing together, I think it has a lot of benefits, and technology supports this to make it very simple. It saves time. It's seamless access in the clinical workflow, because when I see clinical workflow, this should become a seamless access which brings inside. And I think to be very honest, to be with all the physicians, I think the time what they have in hand, the time with the patient should be highest. The number of clicks it reduces, and it becomes a single point of access, helps the clinician to access it and drive it. So overall, for me, in my opinion, I would say the benefits of CDS with the technology today overscores, and I would honestly believe in over the coming years, this becomes a routine part, a practice and embedded inside the practice of clinician. That would be my point, sir. And thank you very much for giving this opportunity to give my thoughts and how we are also supporting it. Thank you.
But there's no doubt, CDS really provides enormous, past data based on the opinion, which doctor can take into consideration. But we keep saying that CDS cannot be the master; it remains the slave. Doctor remains the master, but it is invariable companion of the doctor. So I think we really need to have more application of the CDS in our country. I am sure it is going to happen. There was one small opinion from one of the the viewer. He says, "I wish this panel had hospital facility planners, as many medical errors are due to many physical environmental planning issues, poor lighting at medication preparation or patient beds. Panel should have also nursing administrator who actually can play a larger role in minimizing error." But the last point I want to understand what is this he's writing. Gender bias is major cause in too many errors in patient safety. I don't know whether what really this opinion is meaning. Gender bias, this planning and lighting, that of course is important. Any one of you can comment on this opinion by one of the viewer?
In fact, the lighting part I mentioned because
Yeah.
that is something that is looks very small, but it's important. And nursing has to be involved in a lot of decision making.
Yeah.
In fact, the quality nurse plays a very important role. The medication reconciliation that happens happens along with the clinical pharmacist or clinical pharmacologist, who is there, usually a clinical pharmacist, but along with the quality nurse who's there. They are the ones actually who take part in it. So I think so. Message here is that those who are following it, it's good. Those not following it, I think so. This is the message is that they should use the nursing to add value to that, because they are very adept at picking up things, and because the final care of patients at the bedside is by the nurses. So they have a better way of sort of passing on the information to the staff nurse who are taking care of the patients at the bedside, whether it's the wards, the ICUs, SGUs. So I think that's a good suggestion.
Yeah, but only this gender bias is not the reason for medical. I don't agree with that. Actually, there's one question, maybe, which.
Sorry, sir. Sorry. I think so. He put it obliquely because because most of the nurses are females generally.
Right. Okay, okay. That way. Okay.
So the punitive environment, if it is there, so you should have a non-punitive environment. You should encourage reporting. Sometimes what happens, because we tell them because of you this happened, that actually is a setback. So I think so. Probably I think that he may be meaning that, but I think so. We should be looking at a non-punitive environment and encourage reporting.
Another question is why Medical Council of India, or now let us say we call it NMC, have not included medication error, patient safety into the syllabus for MBBS. Dr. Hari Prasad, you will be able to answer.
It has not been included. It's as simple as that. And I guess people like you who can actually talk to them and who've been there and who can influence people to understand. I think this is one of the primary subjects which need to be added into the syllabus of the young doctors, because practices start young and it is very difficult to change a practice once established. So you might as well intervene at a time when you're actually beginning to form your practice rather than intervene at a later stage to change a habit.
Very good. Let me tell you, in 2012, if you see recommendation from our academic council, there were two recommendations: include communication into the subject and include patient safety based on the WHO has the curriculum made for patient safety. Very, ready-made curriculum is available.
Yeah.
So 2 years back, they have introduced communication, but patient safety per se has still not come into. But I take your point, Dr. Hari Prasad. I will work now with the new NMC and try to see that this comes in. So, Vishal, you want to say something?
No, I think that's a very valid point what Dr. Hari said. I think already associations are starting to work on it on a regular basis. This work is already, we are regularly doing medical legal workshops, creating awareness among people at hospital based level. This can be started. So I think one is at education level and the other is at training level. At both levels, we'll need to adopt this. And I think it is still not, even if it is not in the syllabus, I think as introduced as workshops, HPI and other bodies, sir, can start taking up this particular thing till then as workshops to colleges and making it mandatory to say that we are going to introduce these mandatory workshops at every year so that at least we are able to acclimatize them towards this particular ecosystem.
Dr. Gyani, I just want to add that it's not enough if it is introduced in the medical colleges, it should become a part of the nursing colleges also.
Good.
That is very, very important because I don't want to say who does more errors, but I think there is a significant chunk which is coming from the nursing side also, and the skill of the nurses is not what it used to be.
So there are a few other observations. We'll be replying to them through the mailer, including on infection control. I think we have talked enough. Nair has talked about this subject. But overall, I think the participants are very happy, which the way I am seeing their input directly coming to me on my WhatsApp. They are very delighted to have this kind of panel discussion. And in fact, two of them are saying that this time was too short. When you have invited such galaxy of the people, you should have given them 20 minutes each. I said, okay, we will think about it. But all in all, let me convey my sincere thanks to my all colleagues. I call you my colleagues, and to Healthcare Radius for organizing this event. And thanks to Sujata particularly, again, I will say, who could really bring this kind of people on one platform. And I'm sure this is going to add a lot of value to the listeners and the participants. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Gyani, for moderating this wonderful session. And thank you all the panel members for dedicating their busy time during this weekend. And it has been a very insightful conversation. I wish we could continue the conversation. We will be having a second part of this webinar in the month of November. We would expect everyone to be a part of it. Do follow us on our social media pages so that you will be updated about our further initiatives. Thank you everyone once again, and happy Diwali to everyone.